Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Real Freedom Podcast, where we talk about building wealth, gaining time and financial freedom through different opportunities in real estate. And today, I had to search far and wide all across the United States, all across the world to find my guest today who can share his story of growing his company. And actually, he's less than probably 15 minutes away from me. He's got a development project that's less than a mile away from me. So it's fun to be able to interview somebody that is so closely connected to where I'm at. But we've got Mike Kaeding here. Mike is the CEO of Norhart, a real estate builder and developer. And so your goal, which I really love, is transforming the ways that apartments are built and managed and incorporating new technologies, new approaches, really trying to be a disruptor in the space. And so this was a family business for you. We'll kind of talk about that story and how that came to be. But really, you're a disruptor looking to change the way that things are done. And so we'll deep dive into that. Welcome, Mike, to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why don't you just go ahead and share a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where we're at, and then we'll dig in deeper from there.
Yeah, so my parents originally started the business. It was really small when growing up. We were only building a few units per year. And I can remember days where my family would take us on family outings to the local hardware store about a half an hour away, stock up on supplies and my dad's little trailer and race on back. And we'd be building these buildings growing up. So that was my summers. And then during the winter, I would go off to school. And we were slowly building this company up. And then I went off to college. And when I went off to college, I wanted nothing to do anything more with the family business. And looking back, I think the reason that is that I don't want people to think it was given to me. So I really wrestled with my own ego in that regard. But after graduating, my dad really wanted me to join. And what I realized deep down is that I wanted to make some kind of meaningful, positive impact on the world. Like, life is short. Let's do something impactful. And I realized I could take this small business and grow it into something much larger that could have a meaningful impact. And what we're shooting to do today is solving America's housing affordability crisis. That's our dream.
It's interesting that you talk about, taking over the family business. I was an entrepreneurship major in college. And the funny thing is I had no desire of starting a business right out of college because I wasn't a risk taker, but a lot of my classmates were kind of in your shoes where it's like, this is a family company and either they think I'm going to take it over, I really want to take it over, or my parents sent me here because they want me to take it over and I don't know if I want to take it over. And so that is kind of that piece where some people are like, you're going to do the family business no matter what. Some people are like, whatever they choose is great. But yeah, it is a tough spot to be in, like you said, because you don't want people to feel like you didn't have to work for it. It was just handed to you. So
I jumped in and my dad and I worked on the business for a couple of years together. We doubled the size of the company in that time period, which is exciting. And
what type of, out of curiosity then, like what types of projects were you doing and where? Was it all in Minnesota or were you guys out of state yet, or where was that at?
Yeah, at that time, again, we were very, very small. It was all in Minnesota. It was all in the North Metro. In fact, it was all in one little city here in the state. And so we were building, when I was growing up, it was maybe 8 or 10 units at a time. By the time my dad and I were doing it together, it was 30 units at a time per year. And then within a couple of years of working together, my dad, he unexpectedly passed away. And so one day he was here, one day he wasn't. And that was a huge challenge. But looking back, there was almost a magic in it because it was through that experience that we got to start experimenting and trying new things because I didn't really know the way things were supposed to be done, right? And at that point, I had nobody to tell me no. And so we started experimenting, started trying new things. And this is where we started to have success changing the way construction is done, because that's our dream, is to solve housing affordability by reducing construction costs. But there was a lot of painful moments, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing and I had some really tough experiences. In fact, the city at the time even shut us down because I didn't think I could do what I needed to do. So it was a challenging point in that point of my life.
I like the opportunity there where, like you said, you kind of didn't know what you didn't know. And so you're asking questions. I think sometimes, when I was new into residential real estate, when I got into real estate, I didn't necessarily know how things were done. And so I kind of had this eyes wide open mentality. And sometimes people would look at you like, you think you can do that? Or like, what were you trying to do? It's like, well, I worked in a nonprofit for 10 years. I don't know what I can and can't do, or what's possible or what's not possible. And so, yeah, you kind of get this eyes wide open approach where you can kind of turn things on its side, look at it from a different perspective.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a, looking back at it, this sounds a little bit weird, but ignorance is almost an asset. Certainly ignorance creates problems. There's pain. You need to gain some experience. But I think there's a negative side of having too much experience, and that you start to think that like how it works. This is how it should be done, and you start getting stuck in your ways, and you can't dream or invent something new. So I see a lot of value in that point in my life.
As you're looking at things, analyzing costs, analyzing way that things are being done, what's the size of the company? How many other people are with you and kind of making those types of decisions and kind of deciding which path you guys are going to go on?
Yeah. So at that point, we were building about 30 units a year. Once my dad passed away, we actually dropped down to 8 units for 1 year. Um, and there was like 20 or so employees at the time. And we're starting to experiment with new stuff. I remember one of the big things that happened around that time is one of the plumbing contractor we had came to us and said, dude, Mike, that bid that we've been consistently at with all your projects, we're now going to triple our price. And I look at him like, dude, I can't afford it. I don't have the money. And we talked to other plumbing contractors and everyone was just as expensive. And so sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. But we're like, well, can't we do plumbing? Can't be that hard, can it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I bought a bunch of books, and we did hire one guy with a license so we could do the plumbing ourselves, and then a bunch of inexperienced people, and it was a disaster. But what was great is that we were able to do it and do it right. It was really painful, ended up costing quite a bit initially. Then we started to build the right team in place, right? And now we have this capability, and we're actually doing plumbing, and we're doing it pretty well. Wow, can we now expand it into other areas and start bringing that under our roof as well? And so that was some of the starts of the change.
So being able to bring stuff in-house, kind of have that vertical integration. So instead of the plumber making, X% of profit, now that's coming back to you because you're able to do that in-house at cost to you.
Yeah, we see not only a savings in cost, but the other benefit there is quality goes up, right? Because like I used to have drywallers as a separate company, and I would walk in on the drywallers, and in some walls they have to have 2 layers of drywall, and the first layer has to be the same as the second. And the first layer looked like kindergartners would put it up, and they did that because they knew they could hide it, right? When you start to have your own team and you don't incentivize them to take shortcuts, they do better work. And so, yeah, we started having some success with that.
So you're working on your own stuff. You're starting to bring stuff in-house. What happened in terms of expanding to other locations then, or expanding outside of your small area that you were beginning with?
So for the first few years, we were growing at a pretty regular rate, maybe 10 or 15% per year. But then one of the biggest and most key transitions that happened for us is people much smarter than me kind of told me an important lesson, just to hire the best people. I wasn't doing that at the time. I was hiring, average people. But we really made a big transition. We let a lot of people go. We went back and we hired a bunch of people. We ended up hiring on 14 recruiters and really diving in. And when I say the best, I truly mean the best. Right now, we fly people in from other states to come work for us during the week, fly them home. One of our employees, Steve Jobs announces the iPhone in 2007. Steve Jobs walks off stage and this employee follows him on stage. It's that kind of caliber of world-class people. Because when you start to have that level of people, they change the game. They start unlocking doors for you that you didn't know could be unlocked. And so at this point, a lot of people come to me and say, Mike, dude, that sounds really expensive. On a cost per person basis, it is. You got to pay top of market to get these kind of people. But what most people fail to understand is that the best people outperform the average by 2 to 5 to 10 times as much. And I've seen it over and over again. So when you look at it on a cost per unit produced, the best people are actually less expensive. So when people ask me and say they can't afford to hire the best people, I tell them they can't afford not to. And that was the turning point when we went from being just a small company to doubling in size almost every year.
So how do you go find these people then? If, like you said, you're flying in people from out of state, are these tradespeople? Are these leadership management type people, project managers, or kind of everybody?
It's everybody. And that was some of the debates we had early on is, well, do we only need the best people at the top? No. In fact, you need the best people, like more importantly, at the bottom to the whole organization. So how do we find that? The reality is in the world of construction is it's hard to find good people. And we are faced with exactly the same issue. So I alluded this earlier, but we ended up hiring on 14 recruiters. Let that sink in. We were about, at that point, we were probably about 100 or so employees when we hired 14 recruiters. So 15% of our staff are now recruiting. And what that did for us is it allowed our team to start finding and identifying the best people in other companies. Because guess what? The best people are not looking for jobs. If you think you're going to post a job on Indeed and get great people, you'll get okay, but you're not going to get the best in the world. So recruiters identify the people in other organizations. They start building relationships with them. And then once jobs open up, they pull them in to be interviewed for those kinds of positions. And that was a key part that changed the game for us. And there's a lot you have to do in the culture side as well. But yeah, a lot of moving parts to get right.
I'm curious how the cost of that works, like in terms of being able to defend that, because like you said, recruiters, it takes time to build relationships. And so did you lay out, hey, this is going to take us a year to kind of really start to see traction, or how much money, or kind of what were you looking at to identify, is this really going to work for us? Bring these people in, hire the recruiters, take the time, develop the relationships, and then finally, as spots open, they're like, yes, I want to come work with you. That's a long runway of investment there to be able to see the fruit from that.
Yeah. And goes back to that ignorance is sometimes a blessing, but there's skins in it. I thought originally like, oh, we hired 14 recruiters and we'll get this figured out in no time. Oh boy, yeah. I was wrong.
Because they're not going to be like, oh yeah, thanks. After our first conversation, I'm ready to pack up and move, right?
Yeah, I had dreams, but I was wrong. It took probably a month or two just to ramp up the team to get them running effectively. And then it probably took another 3 or 4 months before we started seeing real significant output in hiring great people. And we get a trickle early on. I think the calculus for me wasn't even an ROI question. I kind of go back a step and I say, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to make an impact in the world, trying to do that through solving housing affordability. Okay, what components, what things do I need in place to make that a reality? Well, a piece of that is I need the right people, and then I need to get the recruiters to get the right people. From a financial standpoint, we've been in a pretty good spot because our costs are typically about 20 to 30% less than other developers today. We think we can actually hit a 50% reduction in cost, but that gives me some wiggle room to try things and make mistakes. I don't need to make sure every decision doesn't have to be a guaranteed positive ROI. If I think it's the right thing in the long term, we'll do it.
Out of curiosity, sorry to kind of bump back half a step here, going back to bringing on these staff. What's the pitch to them? I'm curious. Here's this guy in another state that wants to hire me. Is it, we're going to change the world through how construction is done, and we want you to be a part of it? Is it kind of this big life peace and, world peace and solving world hunger mentality that is attracting people to you? Like, we're going to be the best. We want to hire the best. And that was kind of the tickler in their head that's like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that, versus hey, we'll pay you more, come here? Like, how do you recruit? How do you kind of pull people in like a magnet to what you're trying to build?
Yeah. So I think that that vision is really important. And so for us, we're 20 to 30% less, hoping to hit a 50% reduction in cost. And we say, imagine what that means. That means someday your rent could be half, or your mortgage payment could be half. And when you think about life, my dad died young. We only live about 5,000 weeks here on earth. And I asked myself, how do I want to spend the minutes I have here on earth? And for me, at least, I want to spend that time, at least in large part, making a positive impact on the world. We want to make a dent in the universe. And we share that with people. Like, what do you want your life to be? What impact do you want to make? And a lot of people are like, not for me, which is
Mhm.
totally okay, right? That's what we're trying
You're
to weed
finding the
out.
right people that fit with your vision.
But yeah, the people that resonate with another aspect is that we want to be best in the world at what we do, right? And so we want a team of people that have that energy and drive to become best in the world at what they do. And again, if that's them, they get excited by that. Another key aspect is the culture. Um, the world of construction is typically pretty rough and tumble and not always the most positive environment. But you go on our site, and I hear this over and over again from new people who join us. They can't believe the experience they have. People are welcoming, they're engaging, they're positive. In fact, I was at one engagement team meeting last week, and one of the staff members said, "Dude, Mike, we got so many problems as we do new stuff, and that's hard, right? It's hard inventing the future, and that's tough. But I never want to leave because my coworkers have become my closest friends, right? You create that kind of environment as well, and you communicate that, then they're also very attracted to that space. And then pay and benefits. Our benefits, we actually look at what Google does and we give that to our team. Almost exactly the same benefits, including unlimited time off for hourly construction workers. Wrap your head around mind around that. It's crazy. Um, but and then the pay, we always say, needs to be top of market, but that's never like a reason necessarily people join. It's just a requirement to get the conversation going.
So you're paying them hourly, and if somebody's like, hey, I want to work 30 hours a week this week, you're like, okay, great. How far in advance do they have to kind of schedule that? But for somebody that's like I love hearing these new ideas, and it's always like, okay, I get that, but there's obviously people that are out there that are like, no way, that doesn't work. So how does that conversation work with those employees to where they start to see like, oh yeah, this is great, I can do that?
It really comes back to who you hire, right? It doesn't work. I would say it would not work at all in a traditional construction environment because you just get a bunch of people abusing it.
Right.
Because you want to take time off, there's a conversation with the manager, but you get paid. You get your 40 hours of work or whatever, you get paid for even if you're not there. And you get overtime and stuff. It's crazy. It's a huge benefit. But the right people don't abuse it, right? They know what we're here. We're trying to solve America's housing affordability crisis. We're trying to invent the future with construction. And that's where your mind is and that's where your heart is at. A lot of these guys will put in the extra effort to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And that's their vision, their dream. So when they need to take time off, it's like, no problem. Do what's right for you so that you're living a well-balanced life while changing the world. And if someone is abusing it, if they're taking off every Monday after a football game, right? Then it's not so much about the time off policy. It's more about like, are you the right fit for our culture? Right? Are you really here to become best in the world of what you're doing? That's what I'm more concerned about. The time off is just a secondary result of a deeper emotional state that people are in.
Growing a company like this, being able to finance all these large projects, what challenges or what obstacles have you had to overcome just being able to find the right financing? How does that work on that side for somebody that does want to do development, in the future?
Yeah. So it depends on what stage of growth we're talking about. But for us today, in the last few years, because our costs are so low, if we have $100 million building, a bank will typically fund like 75% of construction, so 75 million. If our costs are 70 million, well, guess what? With each building that we do, we actually generate cash, which is crazy. Now there's details there that we could talk about if you wanted to,
Hmm.
but um the reality of what we're actually running into more recently is interest rates have come down or come up, which means that loan proceeds have gone down. So that same $100 million building may have dropped in value to say 95 million, but the bank's willingness to lend drops to 55 million. So our costs are still 70. Now we're having to bridge that gap. And so I think the key is just to pivot, like realize what's going on in the market and make changes. So for us, the big change that we made is we're launching a new investment platform uh, in a month. And that gives people access to invest in what we're doing and earn a great rate of return, um, and allows us to bridge that financial gap.
It's amazing talking about being able to get a $75 million loan, only have to spend 70 of it
Yeah.
and generate. So how long of your life cycle were you going through that where you were coming under the costs of what the financing was? Up until just like the
Oh,
last
yeah,
year or two?
almost always up until just recently with interest rates
Yeah.
changing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how does that work where you're saying, okay, typically the building cost 100, so the bank's looking at just general numbers from other construction companies to determine that 100, and then like you're in the back of your head going, well, I know we can do it for 70. You're not telling them, hey, we know we can do it for 70, and then they want you to only finance part of that, or kind of how does that conversation go with a bank or a lender?
Hmm. No, you need to be fully upfront with the bank. Never mislead.
Yeah, not saying
Yeah.
you're trying to hide anything, but I'm just curious like how that works.
Banks will only lend up to 75 or 80% of value or cost, whichever is lower. And we went and literally met with all the major banks here in Minnesota and said, hey, our costs are lower. How can we work out something that you're not going to care as much about cost? Well, they still do care about cost. But what we're able to do when we worked out with them is a few things. One is we can add a developer fee to boost that cost. And we're all transparent that that's just a fee that we get. That is only about 5 or 10% of that gap. The bigger part of the gap, the way we solve it is we have our general contractor. Then underneath that, we have all of our subcontractors. Those are separate companies. And so the subcontractor is allowed to charge fair market price for the work that they do, but they then earn a profit on that. And so ultimately what happens is we do to put cash into a project at the beginning to pay the initial expense, but as the building goes on, we actually earn profits on all the subcontractor work, and so that cash quickly gets replenished.
We've kind of covered a lot of these big pieces here. So right now it kind of sounds like you're pivoting a bit on the financing side, trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this at higher interest rates? What are some of the other things that you're looking at here as you're looking to shift and grow, in kind of the next 5 to 10 years? What are you having to kind of adjust in your business plan?
Yeah, our dream in 10 years is to reach 192,000 units under management with a 60,000 unit per year construction pace. At that point, I think we can start having a meaningful impact on the market. So then it's all about how do we build to that kind of level. And so part of it is just geographic expansion. So right now we're primarily in Minnesota, although we have manufacturing capabilities in Wisconsin as well. But we're expanding our properties into Texas, our manufacturing into Mexico, and we have about 15% of our staff are actually international. The other big part of it, beyond just geographic expansion, is improving the way construction is done. We're actually working on building the system that builds housing. And that system is where all the magic is. Elon Musk talks about how it's hard to produce a car, but it's 10 to 100 to 1,000 times harder to produce the system that builds cars. And so there parts of that system is offsite construction and factories that we have. Other parts of it is the systems that we use to actually build within the building, are, I would say, pretty cutting edge. And then another one is the sourcing, because we're sourcing all these materials across the world to fly into our building, and getting that supply chain just right is another big part of it. Yeah, so that's a flavor of what we're working on.
How does that work? Because I know I hear a lot of, I've talked to other construction companies across the United States, and a lot of them are like, hey, we like to do construction in the South because it's warm all the time and we can work year round. You guys, still being here in Minnesota, for those that don't know, it's cold here and there's a lot of snow that happens in the winter. So how do you plan for that in terms of the construction on your projects?
Yeah, it's tough. So we have a very continuous flow of work. Right now, every 5 hours, a brand new apartment unit's completed, and that's continuous, right? And so that means we have to pour footings at all times of the year. We have to pour concrete walls at all times of the year. And it's just being thoughtful. There's no one silver bullet. So part of the solution is you can let the concrete team get out ahead a little bit so that on particularly cold days, they can take those days off and you don't impact the entire flow. There is things like tenting and covering concrete that can be used. In the precast facility, that's all outdoors at the moment. So they're pouring concrete literally year round. And they have these collapsible tents that they use to keep the space warm throughout the winter. And so, yeah, it's just looking at each individual problem and saying, what's the best way to solve this particular problem?
The other piece that I know you mentioned was, so obviously the lower construction cost allows you then to rent for cheaper rates. So you're owning all these properties and then continuing to manage them after you build them, correct?
That's right. We're dirt all the way to key, the whole entire process.
Yeah. So talk about kind of the property management piece and the upkeep, and then two, from tenants that are living in these buildings, the response you've heard, what are you kind of charging for rents compared to market and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So if you look at our rents are market rate. And people often ask me and say, dude, Mike, you just talked about creating affordable housing and you're charging fair market rents. That's intentional. And the reason that is we're taking those profits and putting it into building the system that builds housing. We're hoping to expand up to that 192,000 level, 60,000 units per year. But at that point, we can start having a meaningful impact on housing supply. And with enough supply, naturally brings down prices, but not just for our own residents, for everyone. So that's our dream, is to solve housing affordability nationwide, not just for our own staff. So that's why prices are not lower today. As far as the property management side, it took me a while to get this right too. And it was really about hiring the right people. We ended up hiring the right people, and it has been amazing. The experience, the response times are great. The response I get from residents is awesome. The relationships they build with residents are great. And then also just from a amenity standpoint, like some of our newest properties, the one in Oakdale, for example, that has a restaurant, coffee shop, co-working space, a pool. It has a spa, a sauna. It has penthouse suites, it has a rooftop patio and grill that views the downtown, great views of downtown. There's a brand new transit line that's stopping right at the front door. And so we're thinking a lot about how do we create almost a resort style experience for our residents. So like as many of the pain points as we can take out of their life are just removed.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I can totally see. I've talked in the past with even people just buying buildings, for as investment properties, talking about the property management being important because, a lot of times you think about the people that manage properties, they have their own third party company, they've got other stuff to worry about. But when it's vertically aligned with the construction, taking care of the asset that your company helped to build, and then you've got this bigger vision aligned with it of helping solving affordable housing and providing a great place for people. I can absolutely see how the property management just fits in line with that from a vision standpoint of, we care about this building, we care about this people because it's part of something bigger than just Joe Schmo over here hired me to hack this building while they own it for the next couple of years. And then somebody else will probably own it and we'll move on to the next thing.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And even with property management, when I started off, I thought, okay, property management, that's kind of a solved problem. Just hire a few people and make it happen, right? Boy, that's the wrong approach to take. Because again, this is human beings you're dealing with. And unless you hire and support an amazing team, they're not going to provide the right experience to that resident. And so getting that experience right is critical.
For people that want to get a hold of you, how can they learn more about your projects and these investment opportunities?
Yeah, you can learn more by visiting norhart.com. That's norhart.com. We have the investment platform there. But the one interesting thing that we're launching very shortly now is a new podcast called Zero to Unicorn. It's about the journey of small business growing to $1 billion enterprise and really looking at what is that experience really like? What's the good, the bad, and ugly going from literally nothing to $1 billion impact?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike, so much for coming on and sharing. It's cool to see somebody who's got values tied behind what they're doing, wanting to solve some of the world's larger issues versus just, hey, we're going to make a business that's going to make me some money and go from there. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, and excited for people to be a part of it. I mean, it's a company that people want to be a part of, like working there. And so thank you so much for sharing the journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Have you ever heard the phrase, you're the average of the top 5 people that you hang around? Well, real estate agents, I'm excited to increase your 5 with you. We're launching the Real Freedom Investor Agent Tribe to help you get educated and connect with others to build your real estate investing journey, and also to help you along the way as you're working with real estate investors. So come check it out on our website, realfreedom.com. Go to the store. We have a membership, we have a mastermind group, and private coaching to help you stay accountable to your real estate investing goals and to make sure that you connect with like-minded people to accelerate your progress and to cheer you on along the way. Check it out, realfreedom.com. Click on the store.